Hey everyone, welcome back. Thank you for tuning back in for Chapter 6 of Success Through Positive Mental Attitude. This chapter is titled, You've Got a Problem? That's Good. I am assuming this is going to expound some more on what we talked about in the last chapter regarding specifically using your setbacks in order to find solutions to problems that you have, or in order to improve your life in some way, whether it's success, wealth, mental health, whatever. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So you've got a problem? That's good. Why? Because repeated victories over your problems are the rungs on your ladder of success. With each victory, you grow in wisdom, stature, and experience. You become a better, bigger, more successful person each time you meet a problem and tackle and conquer it with PMA. Stop and think about it for a moment. Do you know of a single instance where any real achievement was made in your life or in the life of any person in history that was not due to a problem with which the individual was faced? Everyone has problems. This is because you and everything in the universe are in a constant process of change. Change is an inexorable natural law. What is important to you is that your success or failure to meet the challenges of change are dependent on your mental attitude. You can direct your thoughts and control your emotions, and thus regulate your attitude. You can choose whether your attitude will be positive or negative. You can decide whether you will affect, use, control, or harmonize with the changes in yourself and in your environment. You can ordain your destiny. When you meet the challenges of change with PMA, you can intelligently solve each problem with which you are confronted. How do you meet a problem with PMA? If you know and believe the first principle element of a positive mental attitude, God is always good, then you can effectively use the following formula and meet your problems. When you are faced with a problem that needs a solution, regardless of how perplexing it may be. 1. Ask for divine guidance. Ask for help in finding the right solution. 2. Engage in thinking time for the purpose of solving your problems. Remember that every adversity has the seed of an equivalent or greater benefit for those who have PMA. 3. State the problem. Analyze and define it. 4. State to yourself enthusiastically, "That's good." 5. Ask yourself some specific questions, such as, "What's good about it?" And B. How can I turn this adversity into a seed of equivalent or greater benefit, or how can I turn this liability into a greater asset? Keep searching for answers to these questions until you find at least one answer that can work. Now the problems that will confront you will, broadly speaking, be of 3 kinds. Personal problems, emotional, financial, mental, moral, physical, family problems, and business or professional problems. Because personal problems are most immediate problems experienced by all of us, we would like to tell you the story of a man who met some of the most severe problems a human being can experience. As you read this story, see how he applied PMA to the solution of each difficulty until he achieved ultimate victory. This man was born in poverty. While in grade school, he sold newspapers and shine shoes in and around the saloons on Seattle's waterfront to help his mother meet expenses. Later, he became a cabin boy on an Alaskan freighter during the summer months. After he finished high school, at the age of 17, he left home. He became one of the horde of hobos that rode the trails and traveled to every part of the United States. His companions were hard-bitten men. He gambled, associated with riffraff, men of the so-called Border Legion. Soldiers of fortune, fugitives, smugglers, cattle thieves, and the like were his companions. He joined the forces of Pancho Villa in Mexico. You can't skate close to those extra-legal operations without knowing about them, even if you have nothing to do with them. Charlie Ward said, "My mistake was being with the wrong companions. My major sin was associating with people who were bad." From time to time, he won large sums gambling, and then lost them. Finally, he was arrested for narcotics smuggling. He was tried and convicted. Yet throughout his life, Charlie Ward maintained his innocence of the charge on which he was convicted. Charlie Ward was 34 years old when he entered Leavenworth. He had never been in jail before in spite of his associations, and he was embittered. He vowed that no prison was strong enough to hold him. He looked for a chance to make a break. Then something happened. Charlie chose to change his attitude from negative to positive. He met the challenge to change with PMA. Something within him told him to stop being hostile and to become the best prisoner in the prison. From that very moment, the entire tide of his life began to flow in the direction most favorable for him. By the simple change from negative to positive thinking, Charlie Ward began to master himself. He changed the direction of his aggressive personality. He forgave the federal agents who had brought about this plight. He quit hating the judge who sentenced him. He took a real good look at the Charlie Ward of the past, and he resolved to avoid the very appearance of evil in the future. He looked around for ways to make his stay in prison as pleasant as possible. First, he asked himself some questions, and for the first time in his life, his adult life, he found his answer in books, particularly the book. In his prison cell, he began to read the Bible. He read it and reread it. Thereafter, and up to the date of his death at the age of 73, he read the Bible every day for inspiration, guidance, and help. Because of his change in attitude, and consequently in behavior, he began to attract favorable notice from the prison officials. And one day, a convict clerk told him that a trustee in the power plant was to be released in 3 months. Charlie Ward knew little about electricity, but there were books on electricity in the prison library. So he studied. He learned what these books could teach him. At the end of 3 months, Charlie was ready. He applied for the job. Something about his mannerism and his tone of voice impressed the deputy warden. That something was the earnestness and sincerity of Charlie Ward's positive mental attitude. He got the job. Because he continued to study and work with PMA, Charlie Ward became superintendent of the prison power plant with 150 men under him. He tried to inspire each of them to make the best of his situation. When Herbert Hughes Bigelow, president of Brown and Bigelow of St. Paul, Minnesota, arrived at Leavenworth on a conviction of income tax evasion, Charlie Ward also befriended him. In fact, he went out of his way to motivate Bigelow to adjust himself to his environment. Mr. Bigelow was so appreciative of Charlie's friendship and help that, as his prison term approached its end, he told Charlie, "You have been good to me. When you get out, come to St. Paul. We will have a job for you." 5 weeks later, Charlie was released from prison and went to St. Paul. As he had promised, Mr. Bigelow gave Charlie a job. He was given work as a laborer at $25 a week. Because Charlie worked with PMA, he became a foreman within two months. After a year, he became a superintendent. Finally, Charlie was made vice president and general manager. And when Mr. Bigelow died, Charlie was made president of Brown and Bigelow. He continued in this capacity until his own death many years later. Under Charlie's management, sales rose from less than $3 million to over $50 million annually. Brown and Bigelow became the largest company of its kind. Because of Ward's positive mental attitude and his desire to help those less fortunate, he helped himself receive peace of mind, happiness, love, and better things in life. By presidential decree, his rights as a citizen were restored in acknowledgement of his exemplary life. Those who knew him held him in the highest esteem and were themselves inspired to help others. Perhaps one of his most unusual and commendable activities was his employment of over 500 men and women who had come from prisons. They continued their rehabilitation under his stern and understanding guidance and inspiration. He never forgot that he too had been a convict. He wore a tag on his bracelet with his old prison number as a symbol. Charlie Ward had been sentenced to prison. That was good. Why? Who knows what might have become of Charlie Ward had he continued in the direction in which he was headed. But in prison, he met the challenge to change, and there he learned to use PMA to solve his personal problems. He made his world a better world to live in. He became a bigger and better man. No one will ever know the exact number of the needy who have prayed for blessings to Charlie Ward in response to their inner thoughts. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Fortunately, not everyone is faced with the problems as severe as those with Charlie Ward was called upon to meet and solve. But there is a lesson in Charlie's story, in addition to the fact that he changed his attitude from negative to positive. You will recall Charlie himself said, "My greatest mistake was being with the wrong companions." Negative attitudes are often contagious, and bad habits are contagious as well. Let each of us look to our own associations and be certain to keep them on the highest possible level. One of the greatest services you can render to children is to motivate themselves to select the right kind of friends and associates. Remember, vice is a monster of such awful men that to be hated needs but to be seen. Yet seen too oft, familiar with his face, we first endure, then pity, then embrace. Another force with which every human being is to contend, and which, if not met with PMA, can cause physical, moral, and mental destruction, is the power of sex. Sex presents the greatest challenge of change. Each human being has the power to choose for himself whether he will use the tremendous power of sex for good or for evil. Each human must contend with the problems that will arise in his life because of sex. One of God's greatest gifts to mankind is the power to procreate a human being. Sex is the means of procreation. It is power. Like all power, it can be used for good or for evil. Sex is a physical function of the body under the control of the subconscious and conscious mind. It is inherited. The physical sex organs, works of God, like all his creations, are good. The little difference that makes the big difference between the power of sex and being a virtue or a vice is mental attitude. The inherent emotion of sex is one of the most powerful forces of the subconscious mind. The effects of its motivating power can be observed long before adolescence. This power blends with and intensifies the driving force of all other emotions. When it is in conflict with the will of the conscious mind, the power of imagination, as it affects the emotion of sex, has a tendency to win unless the conscious mind uses its power to affect, use, control, and harmonize with the power of the subconscious. You have the power to choose. Choose wisely. With PMA, transmute sex into virtue. Thus you will win over one of the greatest problems you will ever have to face in your personal life, and you will be physically, mentally, and morally better. And what are the 7 virtues? Virtue is a moral practice or action, moral excellence, rectitude, valor, or chastity. The 7 virtues are prudence, fortitude, temperance, justice, faith, hope, and charity. Number 1, prudence, the ability to govern and discipline oneself by the exercise of reason. 2, fortitude, strength of mind that enables a person to encounter danger or bear pain or adversity with courage. It is the possession of the stamina essential to face that which repels or frightens one, or to put up with the hardships of a task imposed. It implies triumph. Synonyms are grit, backbone, pluck, and guts. 3, temperance, habitual moderation in the indulgence of the appetites and passions. 4, justice, the principle or ideal of just dealing or right action. Also conformity to this principle or ideal, integrity. 5, faith, trust in God or a higher power. 6, hope, the desire with expectation of obtaining what is desired, or belief that it is obtainable. And 7, charity, the act of loving all men as brothers because they are sons of God. It stresses benevolence and goodwill in giving and in the broad understanding of others with kindly tolerance. Also, I'd like to note, too, charity can simply be understood also as the quality or the interest in giving to others selflessly. For those of you who are, like I said, not particularly religious, I will explain more later. But all of these have a definition that coincide with them that aren't from religious purposes or religious origin. How can you transmute the power of sex into the good and the beautiful? A crystal clear answer can be found by you if you search for it as you read and study this entire book. Results will be achieved when you relate and assimilate the principles into your own life. One must gain knowledge for himself. The following suggestions may be helpful as you search for your answer while reading. 1. Keep your mind on the things that you want and off the things that you don't want. This means that you keep your mind on immediate, intermediate, and distant desirable objectives. The instinct of sex in the subconscious mind will be patient if it has hope that you will fulfill life's mission. The boy or girl who is truly in love and plans to marry will not have the sex problems he or she might otherwise have. 2. If there were more and often earlier marriages, there would be fewer sex problems. Life's mission to procreate is fulfilled in marriage. However, marry for love beyond the sex instinct. 3. Lead a well-balanced Foursquare life. 4. Work long hours at a labor of love. It will keep you busy, occupy your thoughts, and use up surplus energy. 5. Develop a magnificent obsession. Study the significance to be found in Chapter 15. 6. Relate and assimilate into your own life the concepts in Chapter 2. You can change your world. In Chapter 7, learn to see. 7. Select an environment that will develop you best towards your objectives. And number 8, choose the self-motivators for self-suggestion that you believe will help you. Memorize them. Make them a part of yourself so that in times of need they will flash from your subconscious mind to your subconscious mind as auto-suggestion. Not all the problems of one's personal life, however, are so deep and penetrating in nature. Many times, all that it takes to meet an immediate problem is quick thinking, adaptability, and taking a second look at the situation which is causing the problem. It often takes only one idea, followed by action, to turn failure into success. In 1939, on Chicago's North Michigan Avenue, in an area known as the Magnificent Mile, office space was going begging. Building after building had empty floors. One that was half rented was considered lucky. It was a bad year for business, and NMA hung over Chicago real estate like a cloud. You heard such comments as, "No sense in advertising, there just isn't money around," or "What can you do? You can't fight the times." Then into this gloomy picture came a building manager with PMA. He had an idea, and he got into action. This man was hired by Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company to run a large building on North Michigan Avenue, which they had acquired in a mortgage foreclosure. When he took the job, the building was only 10% occupied. Within 1 year, it was 100% rented, with a long waiting list. What was the secret? The new manager accepted the problem of no demand for offices as a challenge rather than a misfortune. Here is what he did as he explained in an interview. "I knew precisely what I wanted. I wanted to have the premises 100% occupied with choice, substantial tenants. I knew that under the prevailing conditions it was likely that the offices would not be rented for possibly several years. I therefore concluded that we had everything to gain and nothing to lose by doing the following. 1. I would seek out desirable prospective tenants of my choice. 2. I would stimulate the imagination of each prospect. I would offer him the most beautiful offices in the city of Chicago. 3. I would offer him the superior offices at a rental no higher than the one he was now paying. 4. Furthermore, I would assume responsibility for his present lease, provided he paid us the same monthly rental under 1-year lease. And 5. In addition to all this, I would offer redecoration without cost to the tenant. I would employ creative architects and interior decorators and remodel the offices of my building to suit the personal taste of each new tenant. I reasoned, 1. If an office were not rented during the next few years, we would receive no income from that office. So we had nothing to lose by going into such arrangements as are above described. We might come out at the end of the year with no income, but we would be no worse off than we would have been if we had not acted. And we would be better off because we would have satisfied tenants who would in future years supply dependable rentals. 2. Furthermore, it is an established custom to rent offices at a 1-year basis only. In most cases, there would be only a few months left to run on the old lease of my new tenant. Promising to assume these rentals was therefore not too great a risk. 3. If a tenant should vacate at the end of his year, it would be comparatively easy to re-rent in a well-filled building. The redecoration of his office would not be money lost, as it would have increased the equity value of the entire building. The result was marvelous. Each newly redecorated office seemed to be more beautiful than the one that had preceded it. The tenants were so enthused that many expended additional sums. In one instance, a tenant spent an additional $22,000 in remodeling. So at the end of the year, the building, which had started off only 10% rented, was 100% rented. None of the tenants wanted to leave after this lease expired. They were happy with their new ultra-modern offices, and we gained their permanent goodwill by not raising the rents at the expiration of their first 1 year's lease. We would like you to think back over this story. There was a man faced with a most serious problem. He had a giant office building on his hands that had 9 empty offices in it for every one that was occupied. And yet within a year, his building was 100% rented. Now, right next door, up and down the Magnificent Mile, there were dozens of office buildings standing idle and practically empty. The difference, of course, was the mental attitude with each individual building manager brought to the problem. One man said, "I have a problem, that's awful." The other said, "I have a problem, that's good." A man who seizes upon his problems as opportunities in disguise and scrutinizes them for the good element that is going to be there is the man who understands the very core of PMA. The man who develops an idea that can work and follows it with action will turn failure into success. Time after time, the pattern repeats itself. Problems and difficulties turn out to be the best things that could have happened to us, provided we translate them into advantages. As you recognize, the problem with which each building manager faced occurred during the Depression. Things were still plenty tough in 1939 when he solved this problem, but they had been much worse. Now the economic problems of the nation and of the world arose as the result of the Depression. Depressions are caused by cycles in the economic life of a nation or nations, but it is not necessary to sit idly by. There is no need to be beaten and tossed to and fro by the cycles of life. You can meet the problem of cycles and conquer it intelligently. In so doing, you can often acquire a fortune. Many years ago, Paul Raymond, vice president in charge of loans for the American National Bank and Trust Company of Chicago, rendered a service to his bank's customers. He sent them Dewey and Dakin's book, Cycles. Subsequently, many of these clients made fortunes. They learned and understood the theory of business cycles and trends. Some of them will be among those who won't lose the fortunes they acquired regardless of economic trends and changes. Edward R. Dewey, who has been the director for the Foundation for the Study of Cycles for many years, points out that every living organism, be it in individual, business, or nation, grows to maturity, levels off, and dies. What is equally important, he indicates a solution whereby, regardless of the trend or cycle, you as an individual can do something about it. You can meet the challenge of change successfully. You can change the trend as far as you and your interests are concerned, regardless of the general trend. With new life, new blood, new ideas, new activity. Before newspapers publicized the recession that began in the latter part of 1957, one of the bank's clients got into action. His organization went after business aggressively with a positive mental attitude. In 1958, his company developed a premium increase of over 30% compared to the previous year, which had shown a 25% increase. The entire industry, however, had a downward trend. Sometimes, the cycle that presents a problem is not a cycle that affects an industry or an entire nation. It may be a cycle within an individual business only. This problem, too, can be anticipated and met. Witness the continual growth of many American corporations, in spite of the fact that in the normal course of events they would have grown to maturity, leveled off, and died. E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Co., Inc. is an outstanding example. It is unnecessary to point out that E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company, Inc. has continued to grow. But what is the cause of its success? Why has it not followed the natural cycle of growing to maturity, level off, and dying? DuPont has met the challenge of change with new life, new blood, new ideas, and new activity. Its executives have met this problem with PMA and the determination to overcome it. They have continued to engage in research and are constantly making new discoveries, developing new products, and perfecting their previous products. They inject new blood into their management, study and improve their sales methods. Learn from their success. The owner of a small business, or you as an individual, can study and experiment. You can relate and assimilate the principles used by such a large corporation. You too can continue to grow with booster shots of new ideas, new life, new blood, and new activity. You can change a downward trend into an upward one. You can be different. When others float downstream, you can move upstream. So many of the stories you have read and will read in this book indicate that if you have a problem, that's good. It's good if you learn to see how to turn adversity into seeds of equivalent or greater benefit. You may still not see the principle. However, the new chapter entitled Learn to See can help you. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 6. This one took an interesting turn, I will say. I definitely did not expect some of the things. But first of all, I'll talk about the mention of the 7 virtues, right? Which are, I'm sure Napoleon Hill is drawing from the Bible. They are virtues mentioned by Jesus in the Bible. But I want to mention them because, as I said a little bit earlier, there are secular equivalents to those, or at least secular definitions that are equivalent to the ones that he gave. And I want to stress that because, again, as I've said before, to those in the Christian community, this is easy stuff. This is stuff that was already taught, in Christian education, things like that. If you're already into the Bible, this is stuff that's easy for you to assimilate to. However, for those of us who are not particularly Christian, the mention of reading the Bible, the mention of adhering to the virtues that are mentioned in the Bible, and even some of the things that he was saying about controlling or being virtuous with the gift of sex, right? Those are, it may be a little bit bigger of a jump, right? It may be a little bit more not difficult, but it's hard conclusion to reach, right? And I want to talk on that for a minute because I think it's important. So like I said, the virtues, the 7 virtues that he mentioned, each of those are still good economically pro-social virtues, right? You can live them out. You can exemplify them in your own life without any particular connection to Christianity, the Bible, faith, God, anything like that. And they are good to practice. They are good to practice. Especially in regards to the virtue of being virtuous with the gift of sex. I half expected him to kind of bring up the concept of abstinence, which is a pretty particularly Catholic thing, and I think Christian faiths also practice this too, but it's a big and more serious thing in the Catholic faith. But he didn't quite mention it. He almost did, but he didn't quite get there. But what I will say about that is, whatever your lifestyle is right now, whether you adhere to the more Christian or Catholic belief that one should wait until marriage to have sex, or not, there is still a need for sexual responsibility, and I want to point that out real quick too. I think what he meant to, I think what he was trying to get at was particularly that the idea of having a virtuous approach to sex and using the sexuality that you have. that can be the difference between the rape culture that is now, and even the, just slightly, the more responsible side of things, right? Not even going full Catholic here, but just saying like, the difference between a shift from I have a sexuality or sexual needs that I just need to I need to fulfill at the expense of other people, right? The rape culture, I say this realizing and wanting to acknowledge that it isn't just the Christian or Catholic community that is speaking out against the rape culture. There's certainly been so much vocalized from just the society in general, right? The population of us who are just tired of having to hear about cases of women being raped, and men are raped too, and having any level of disbelief, but also criticism and victim blaming and things like that. That it's still a very real and prevalent thing, right? And the difference between having a responsibility or a virtuous aspect of the sexuality that you have is the difference between, like I said, a culture where, rape is still pretty prevalent, and a hopefully future culture where rape is something that our children, our grandchildren, or we ourselves don't even consider, as even as a result of poor mental health, right? And so I think that's what Napoleon Hill is trying to get at here. Like, again, whether you believe that you should wait until marriage to have sex or not, there is a responsibility, right? There is a level of carelessness with, or lack of planning, lack of focus on the parts of a relationship that build to sex or build around sex. There's a certain level of that is harmful to even society in general and to you personally, right? And I think that's what he's pointing out here is like, on both ends, right? If you are particularly careless with sex or careless with the relationships that you have, that not only affects society, like I said, as it can, but it affects you in that you're putting yourself at risk for an unwanted pregnancy. You're putting yourself at risk for certain financial struggle in the future. And simply put, I mean, the research has been done, being too careless, that ruins that doesn't necessarily ruin your sexuality, but it harms it over time, right? Because over time you lose the ability to wait. You lose the ability to be anything other than sexual, right? And that can lead to, like I said, a hypersexuality or a sexual addiction, or it can lead to a complete burnout, where you're finally in a permanent relationship with somebody and you can't perform, or you don't have a sex drive anymore, because it's just been, expended by that point. So there is a particular, like I said, need, especially I think right now, to focus on the relationship part of a relationship more so than the sexual part of it, right? In such a way as to complement the sexuality of it with a deep and rich and fulfilling relationship in which yourself, the person that you're with, to such a degree that like sex is an extension. It's not the reason you're together. Or it's not the reason that you're still together, right? It's not the thing that's holding the relationship up. It's the thing that's kind of like the icing on the cake. So, yeah, I kind of wanted to make mention of that real quick. And as a therapist, I certainly do see the results of this. I do see the results of what it looks like when sex is the main thing in a relationship and there isn't much relationship building. I have dating couples that seem for all other reasons incompatible. I see married couples who are kind of getting old and their sex drive is kind of tapering off a bit, and they're realizing they don't know how else to be with each other, and and they're on the brink of divorce because all these issues have stemmed from, we don't want to have sex as often as much anymore, but we don't really know what to do now. We don't know what kind of language to use to love each other. So I want to point that out from a mental health perspective, that it does, having a lack of responsibility in terms of your sexuality, or a lack of virtue, in a unhealthy amount of focus on just the sex part of a relationship, that could affect you, that can affect the person you're with, that can affect the relationship you're with, and then out of that could possibly come, children, right? Assuming you've gotten to a place where you're married and you've had kids now, now you have children who may now suffer from a broken home, or, a marriage that went south really fast, just simply because their parents didn't take the time to learn each other in other ways than sexually when they were dating and engaged and now married. So I'm going to leave it at that because I could go on this for a long time. But that is one of the major things that I pulled from this chapter. Just the mention of virtues, the mention of virtue of sex, but then also again another sort of almost call out to Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, as I mentioned in the last chapter, or maybe before that. This idea that a problem is a good thing, right? A problem or a setback or a challenge, those are good things, right? And they don't feel like good things, right? I'm not saying if you come across adversity or a challenge and you're not initially sad about it, that there's something wrong with you. That's just, honestly, it's kind of how we are as humans, right? We want things to be good. We want things to be orderly. We want things to work out. And to that, on this different side of the same token, because of that, our brains are always geared towards finding an answer for things, right? We're always trying to figure out what's going on, if it's wrong, why, and what's happening. Our brains are made that way. It's the reason why, when somebody comes up to you with the problem that they have, or they're feeling sad or they're feeling upset or whatever, the overall instinct of the person listening is to try and help fix that, right? I can get on this in a different subject later about how that tends to affect people who are grieving. It's a particular thing in our society right now where not a lot of people know how to help people who are grieving, because grief is difficult. You can't fix the thing. You can't bring the person they're grieving back more often than not, right? But anyhow, the idea that you can take a thing that is wrong and use it to make something that is better. That is particularly the main message of logotherapy, or the theory that Viktor Frankl came up with, in terms of the fact that we can overcome suffering. The fact that there's no amount of suffering a person can have that they cannot overcome, that they can't use for good, that they can't use to bounce back. I think too that's an important takeaway from this section too, or this chapter as well, because it really is, again, going back on my wanderings about whether or not we're going to be talking about mental health. It's a good segue there. It's a good thing about a good thing to mention that if you got a problem, you can fix it, right? And translating that to mental health is, I have noticed that there's something about me that's not right, right? There's something about me that doesn't seem natural, normal, healthy. Okay, let's go fix it, right? Let's go talk to a therapist. Let's go find a life coach. Let's go, talk to a psychiatrist, a doctor, whoever. Let's get this fixed. No person alive is meant to live their entire life in a state of suffering that cannot be overcome, right? Even people with physical illnesses or born with one leg, or veterans that lose their limbs in combat, right? Heard numbers of stories about people who have come back from that and been able to use that injury, that setback, as something to propel them forward, something to let them overcome, let them succeed, and let them be a light for other people in the same situation. Again, just want to say those two takeaways. The virtues, while religious in origin, are able to be applied secularly and are good and pro-social, economic ways of living. And also, again, no amount of suffering that you can come across is meant to completely destroy you. Whether you believe in God or heaven or a higher power or not, there's thousands and thousands of years of evidence that suffering cannot be overcome. That being said, before I get on this for another 10 minutes, I'm going to let you guys go. Again, thank you for tuning in. As always, let me know what you're thinking. Even if you disagree, I would actually really love to hear people disagree, not because I want to argue, but just because, I like to know how you guys are hearing this information, what it's meaning to you, because then I can learn, what it's like to see this in a different perspective, right? I'm always open for that challenge. I am bringing to this book things that I've learned, things that I personally have come through in my life, and so reading this book, because of the training I have, because of the background I have, it's easy for me to read this and be like, yeah, it makes sense, totally. But if it doesn't make sense to you, please let me know. Even if my own, insights don't make sense to you, I would love to know. So I can learn how to understand your perspective, and I can, better use that for, people or clients in the future I may talk to that have similar viewpoints. Okay? Again, thank you for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care. help people who are grieving, because grief is difficult. You can't fix the thing. You can't bring the person they're grieving back more often than not, right? But anyhow, the idea that you can take a thing that is wrong and use it to make something that is better. That is particularly the main message of logotherapy, or the theory that Viktor Frankl came up with, in terms of the fact that we can overcome suffering. The fact that there's no amount of suffering a person can have that they cannot overcome, that they can't use for good, that they can't use to bounce back. I think too that's an important takeaway from this section too, or this chapter as well, because it really is, again, going back on my wonderings about whether or not we're going to be talking about mental health. It's a good segue there. It's a good thing about a good thing to mention that if you got a problem, you can fix it, right? And translating that to mental health is, I have noticed that there's something about me that's not right? There's something about me that doesn't seem natural, normal, healthy. Okay, let's go fix it, right? Let's go talk to a therapist. Let's go find a life coach. Let's go, talk to a psychiatrist, a doctor, whoever. Let's get this fixed. No person alive is meant to live their entire life in a state of suffering that cannot be overcome, right? Even people with physical illnesses, or born with one leg, or veterans that lose their limbs in combat, right? Heard numbers of stories about people who have come back from that and been able to use that injury, that setback, as something to propel them forward, something to let them overcome, let them succeed, and let them be a light for other people in the same situation. Again, just want to say those two takeaways. The virtues, while religious in origin, are able to be applied secularly and are good and pro-social, economic ways of living. And also, again, no amount of suffering is meant to be permanent, or no amount of suffering is meant to be no amount of suffering is, again, no amount of suffering that you can come across is meant to completely destroy you. Whether you believe in God or heaven, or a higher power or not, there's thousands and thousands of years of evidence that suffering cannot be overcome. That being said, before I get on this for another 10 minutes, I'm going to let you guys go. Again, thank you for tuning in. As always, let me know what you're thinking. Even if you disagree, I would actually really love to hear people disagree, not because I want to argue, but just because I like to know how you guys are hearing this information and what it's meaning to you, because then I can learn, what it's like to see this in a different perspective, right? I'm always open for that challenge. I am bringing to this book things that I've learned, things that I personally have come through in my life, and so reading this book, because of the training I have, because of the background I have, it's easy for me to read this and be like, yeah, it makes sense, totally. But if it doesn't make sense to you, please let me know. Even if my own, insights don't make sense to you, I would love to know. So I can learn how to understand your perspective, and I can, better use that for, people or clients in the future I may talk to that have similar viewpoints. Okay? Again, thank you for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care.